So let's get going, and I suggest we start with that picture. Yeah, so indeed, I mean, Netflix stars are perhaps an unlikely source of inspiration when it comes to conferences on payments. But I'd like to borrow a quote from American actress Lily Tomlin, star of Grace and Frankie, who once said that the road to success is always under construction. And I think with the situation where we are today, it's actually a fitting place to start. Because when it comes to Payments Canada, to payments modernization, the Payments Canada project around payments modernization, we could say that the road to success is now under construction. And clearly the long-term vision has been defined, and it's now time to set the right course to get there. And we've heard this morning perspectives around how to achieve that long-term vision. And we at Swift obviously also have an opinion, having worked very closely with all of you, with Payments Canada and the Canadian community in close partnership over many years. We've seen that vision evolving over time, and I'm convinced that we have strong capabilities to contribute, to play a role, an important role in that road ahead. But before getting into those, I want first to briefly take a step back and set the scene on what we see as the major challenges that the industry is facing. And so when we think about major challenges, obviously the first one that clearly comes to mind is that innovation is happening. It's happening now. There is a new normal in terms of reshaping business models and opening up new opportunities in the market here in Canada, but also beyond. The second one is that cyber and compliance, both of these areas are keeping our feet firmly in the ground. So both have to be dealt with as an industry. And the third is that both of these areas, innovation on the one hand and cyber and compliance on the other, are actually mutually reinforcing. We need to foster a cyber mindset when we come up with new products from the start. But also, cyber and compliance challenges can be best achieved by harnessing innovation. So let me dwell a little bit on these three observations. The first one, innovation. So we've heard talk, of course, all of us, about the fourth industrial revolution. That is essentially an industrial interplay of technology that is not only mobile and cloud, but also robotics, big data, and sensors that is causing us to, on the back of the Internet of Things, reimagine how we're going to live, interact, and do business in the future. So no news there. But what is clear is that it's going to have a major effect in financial services. And we see it already happening. And we heard a lot about it this morning with new technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, and of course, distributed ledger technologies that are opening up new opportunities. But also, we see new competition coming from platform-based businesses that, and particularly fintechs, that on the back of open banking are reshaping business models and are actually reshaping the roles that actors play in the payment ecosystem. And when I talk about competition, obviously it reminds me a story that a Canadian friend from the industry once told me about a couple of guys that went out camping in the forest of British Columbia, and all of a sudden a bear came out, to which the first guy said, started putting on his sport shoes, and the second guy actually asked him, well, what are you doing? You cannot outrun the bear. To which the first guy said, well, I don't need to outrun the bear, I just need to outrun you. So what this tells us is that this competitive race is actually a reality in the market. But we see incumbent players actually responding pretty well to the challenges posed by new players, new fintechs, and are starting to innovate. They are responding to the challenge. They are developing new business models, sometimes also through partnerships and acquisitions. And when it comes to innovating infrastructure, I think there are two schools of thought. The first one is that you can start obviously from scratch, essentially with a blank sheet of paper. The second one is to evolve what you already have and innovate on top and around it. So in a sense, it is a bit like city planning, if you think about it. So take, for example, China. You have Pudong, which is Shanghai glittering financial district. It was completely built from scratch. Or there are now, China recently announced plans to build a brand new city south of China, 100 kilometers south of China, that is going to be, south of Beijing, sorry, that is going to be 3 times bigger than New York. So that's one approach. Another approach is, in contrast, what Toronto took. We all know that the financial district in Toronto has been around since the 19th century, but it has obviously evolved and grown over time. And this expansion has been built around essential foundations and building on top of it. Obviously, Toronto right now is a very vibrant and competitive financial center, and it's actually ranked in the top 10 in the world. So that tells you that both of the approaches can work. So back to our industry, and we see similar dynamics. In a sense, you have fintechs that are obviously unencumbered with legacy systems. They can harness new technologies very fast. They can basically start from scratch. And on the other hand, you have incumbent players, established players, that need to upgrade existing infrastructure, maintain interoperability, but they're finding very interesting ways to do that. So clearly exciting stuff when it comes to innovation. But as in any story, there are two sides to every story. And while all this innovation is coming on stream, we are seeing more and more that we need to also have to handle a lot of down-to-earth stuff as an industry. And that is, if you allow me another analogy, where a team sport, say hockey, to be a great team, you need to obviously have great goal scorers, very creative attack. These are essentially our innovators. But you also need to have very strong defense. And that's where actually financial crime compliance and cyber actually fit in. We've seen with the recent WannaCry attacks that cyber is an issue across many different sectors. And even if figures say that the financial institutions are, on average, the number of attacks on a financial institution are on average 4 times greater than those on companies from other industries. In any case, getting hit is a very expensive business. It is estimated that the average cost of a cyber attack in an organization is in the range of $4 million. So these are obviously unwelcome statistics, but they are part, at the end of the day, of the new normal that the industry has to deal with, the other side of the new normal to innovation. And really it was this time last year that attackers turned their attention towards local infrastructures from banks in order to achieve high-value fraud. In response, SWIFT launched its customer security program, which is essentially a series of mandatory controls that we are now rolling out, as well as focusing on cyber prevention and detection tools and information sharing across the community. So this new normal is something that we're going to have to live with. And in a sense, when it comes to cyber, success there is to convert cyber from being an existential threat into a manageable nuisance. And that is the journey that we're starting with SWIFT and the community with the customer security program. We'll continue to support the industry, but as we saw yesterday in a community work session, there is a huge momentum building across that new framework here in Canada and beyond. So that is as far as cyber is concerned, but obviously the same applies to financial crime compliance. You can draw your own conclusions whether it is a manageable nuisance, but one thing is clear, it needs to be managed, whether it is sanctions, KYC, or AML. Both of these areas need to be managed, and in a sense, they are part of today's license to operate, and it's an area where, again, linking to the theme of this morning, collaboration clearly makes sense. And that leads me to the third observation that I have in terms of the major trends in the industry is that we can say that the digital age, this digital age, is more than ever the age of risk management. We need to foster that compliance mindset when we come up with new products, but the flip side is also true. Innovation needs cyber, but cyber needs innovation. And we see lots of global firms and fintechs that are increasingly focusing on leveraging new technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, of course, and you have also deception technologies that in order to develop new products, new tools in the cyber ecosystem, in areas such as cyber prevention, detection, forensics, remediation, testing, to name a few. So innovation on the attack, cyber and compliance on the defense, and the interrelationship between the two of them is, in a nutshell, a pretty good summary of the context that the industry is operating into. So how is Swift replying to all that? Well, let me take a concrete example, cross-border payments. So in cross-border payments, it is a necessity that all of these three areas, innovation, compliance, and cyber, are jointly addressed. And that is where Swift GPI, together with the customer security program and our financial crime compliance portfolio, actually fit in. GPI, and you'll hear more about it during the conference, has been designed to improve the customer experience when it comes to cross-border payments by essentially increasing speed, same-day funds, transparency, and end-to-end payments tracking. So basically, it's a kind of a FedEx tracking for cross-border payments across the whole payment chain. We have in excess already of 100 leading transaction banks sign up to the service. They represent 75% of the cross-border payments flows. And linking back to the analogy of the city planning, I think one of the reasons for the success of this initiative, of the strong take-up in a short time frame, has been that it has been built on existing rails. So it has been built on existing infrastructure, allowing banks to reuse and to leverage the capillarity of the SWIFT network, to be able to reach the 11,000 plus connected endpoints and be able to deploy this technology much faster. But obviously, being used over existing rail doesn't mean that the solution is static. Obviously, there is a whole roadmap behind GPI that is targeting to reuse potentially even new technologies, as it has been proven with the pilot that we just recently launched, leveraging DLT as a technology for nostro-vostro account reconciliation in order for banks to potentially improve their global liquidity. So we'll see more about the feedback of this pilot and whether the technology could be applied in that concept. Which leads me to payments modernization and Canada in particular, and I'll say a few words. So many of you have asked us, so what is Swift's role in that long-term vision that Payments Canada have defined? So we see three major roles that could potentially be applicable for Swift. The first one is the fact that, of course, goes back to the essence of Swift. Swift is an industry-owned cooperative owned by the industry that is focusing on providing providing essentially resilient and highly secure infrastructure, messaging infrastructure, that all the Canadian market is already equipped with. So basically the first role would be to reuse that infrastructure, like other infrastructure already in the market, like Interact, for example, to reuse that infrastructure and to evolve it with new components, with new assets that in our case, for example, could be those that we came up with as part of the new payments platform development in Australia that could be reused and adapted to the Canadian community. So that's the first role. The second one is obviously standardization. Canada has been leading the way in terms of ISO 20022 adoption. We know the great value of ISO 20022 when it comes to being the first global standard that spans across geographies, across business domains, payments, securities, and FX, but also across segments within a business domain, high value and low value. And with major market infrastructures across the globe, 100 market infrastructures adopting ISO 20022, there is way for interoperability, potential for interconnectivity of all these payment systems. Which leads me to the third role that we could play, which is essentially there, in interoperability, in the interconnection of all these payment market infrastructures, where it is high value or low value. And the way to achieve that interoperability is precisely through GPI. GPI being the platform, the enabler, through which banks will be able to play a central role in being the entrance into all of these payment systems. So these are essentially the three roles. And to wrap up, maybe, I would say that so the road to success in Canada being now clearly under construction, but I would say that there are many clearly questions that need to be addressed about the speed of implementation, about obviously the levels of investments that the banks are ready to put on the table, but also about the balance between existing and new players, existing and new infrastructure. And as I hope I have laid out, I have two main takeaways to share with you, is that one is, well, actually one is a fact, I think, and the other one is a conviction or an opinion. The fact, or I believe is a fact, is that there needs to be a balance between attack and defense. We need to come with innovation, but ensuring that the industry's feet are firmly on the ground, both on cyber and compliance. And the second is, my personal opinion, is that I believe that we can achieve a lot by reusing existing infrastructure, by evolving existing infrastructure in the market, and providing a solid foundation, platform for banks to innovate on top. So that's essentially what we at Swift would like to continue to work with the Canadian community and Payments Canada in particular in reusing existing or new assets to make sure that we construct a successful road ahead. With that, thank you and enjoy your lunch.